Done. Okay, so the Mishnah says, last week we talked about Ava, we talked about love that is dependent upon a factor. You get rid of the factor, get rid of the love. And now we're going to talk about Kol Machlokes L'Shem Shamayim. Any Machlokes, any argument that is L'Shem Shamayim, that is for the sake of heaven, Sofa Liyiskayim, in the end, it is going to endure. But any Machlokes that is not for the sake of heaven, so then that is Ein Sofa Liyiskayim, in the end, it's not going to endure. So the Gemara wants that, so the Mishnah wants to know, Ezui Machlokes Shi L'Shem Shamayim. So what is an example of a Machlokes that is for the sake of heaven? That's the Machlokes of Hillel and Shammai. And what is an example of a Machlokes that is not for the sake of heaven? That's the example of Korach ve'chol adaso, Korach and his congregation. We know that Korach rebelled against Moshe, and there were 250 followers. There was a tremendous machlokes. This was the most dangerous, really, the most dangerous thing that happened, and that is an example of a machlokes that was not for the sake of heaven. So, the first questions that you have to ask is that a machlokes that is not for that is for the sake of heaven. So then it's going to endure. Why do we want any machlokes to endure? Like, why do I care what the reason for the machlokes is? So the argument, the dispute is a holy dispute, right? They're arguing for the sake of heaven. But why is it a good thing? Any argument is technically not a good thing. So if it's not a good thing, then why would I want it to endure? And if it's not for the sake of heaven, it's not going to endure. What is this endurance that we're talking about? Are we saying that it's going to endure forever? It's going to endure in perpetuity. It's going to endure for the time that the people are alive. Like, what is the endurance that we're expecting for a machlokes that is for the sake of heaven? If a machlokes isn't good, right, it's never good for two people to argue and for two people to have a dispute. So then, why would we call it for the sake of heaven? Like, why do I care why you're fighting with me? Like, you could be totally righteously indignant and say, I'm doing this for God, and I'm doing this for the sake of goodness and for the sake of truth and peace, in the American way. You can be Superman in this thing, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you're fighting with somebody. At the end of the day, it's machlokes. So what difference does it make what your motivation is? Oh, I'm doing this for the sake of heaven. Shkoyach, but you're fighting. We know that when God created the world, so on every day that he created the world, he said, Vayichen, and let it be this way. And then he said, Kitov, that, Vayar Elokim, God saw, Kitov, that it was good. And he said that on every day, except for the second day. By the second day, it doesn't say Kitov. And the reason that it doesn't say Kitov is because on the second day, Machlokes was born. Split was born. Dissension, disconnection was born. What does that mean? That we know that it says that God made the rakia that separated bein mayim lemayim, between the upper waters and the lower waters. He took a firmament, he took a sky, or whatever you want to call it, and he put it in between the upper waters and the lower waters. The upper waters were called shamayim, which means sham mayim, there is water, and then the lower waters, that was earth, and mayim, and the regular seas and the waters. That split was considered something that was the creation, it was the beginning. In itself, it wasn't just that he took the firmament and he put it in between the waters, but by doing that, what he did was he created split, he created fissure, he created division. And because division was created, that's not tov. On this day, we can't say tov. It's a beautiful, it's like a beautiful concept to conceptualize that, to see that when you split something, it's not a good thing, and God didn't say the word kitayv because even inadvertently that machlokes was created. That wasn't why God did it, but that what that did was it created chiluk, it created diversion and differentiation. So therefore it wasn't tov. The only problem is that on day 4, when God created the orbs, he created light and dark, right? He created night and day. Lahavdil, says the Torah. Lahavdil, to differentiate bein or lechoshech, between light and dark. And on that day, you find kitov. So what do it was a beautiful, if you just take it in a vacuum the second day, it's a beautiful vart, like it's a beautiful idea. But it doesn't seem to be true, because look later on, just a few days later, when there is also division that is created. And that division is a bad thing. We also bless that division. On Saturday night, we say, Baruch HaMavdil, blessed is God who differentiated bein or lechoshech, between light and darkness, between kodesh and chol, between holy and profane, between Yisrael and Amim, between the Jewish people and the nations. So the differentiation is celebrated. The differentiation is blessed. So what is it? What is the difference between the one where we say this is the creation of Machlokes, that's not good, and this is the creation of Machlokes, kitov, that's fine? Because there's a difference between separating bein mayim lemayim and between or and choshech. Bein mayim lemayim means separating between water and water, two like things that are ultimately the same, they're just being put into two different places. Then that's not a good split, because there you're disconnecting things that should be connected to each other. But bein or lechoshech, between light and dark, between good and bad, between two things that are opposite each other. So then sometimes you have to be mavdil. You have to make that havdal. You have to make that differentiation. You have to be able to say, no, this is light, this is dark, this is good, this is bad, this is acceptable, this is unacceptable. And it takes a strong person to be able to identify what is the difference between mayim and mayim. When am I separating between two things that really belong together? And when am I separating between things and differentiating between things that need to be differentiated? There's a great line that was used by one of the rabbis. It said in America that we know how to make kiddush, but we don't know how to make havdalah. In other words, we know how to recognize certain things, to be able to say, this is special, but we don't know how to actually differentiate between light and dark, between good and bad, to really separate ourselves from things that need us to be separated from them. That is what Machlokes is. Machlokes between two like things, that's tov. I'm sorry, between light and dark, that's tov, that's good. Machlokes between things that are the same, that is dangerous machlokes. So what is a machlokes that is l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven? That's a machlokes between Hillel and Shammai. That kind of machlokes, you're differentiating between two things, and you're doing it in order to be able to clarify the emes, to be able to clarify the truth. And a machlokes that is not l'shem shamayim, not for the sake of heaven, then that machlokes is where it is about being contentious. It's about separating and splitting, but it's not about trying to find the truth or to clarify the truth. And what's fascinating is that it says that what's an example of a machlokes l'shem shamayim, machlokes for the sake of heaven? An example of a machlokes for the sake of heaven is Hillel and Shammai, which we're going to talk a lot about in a few minutes. An example not for the sake of heaven is Korach. Now it should have written Korach and Moshe, Hillel and Shammai, and Korach and Moshe, between the protagonists, the people that are splitting with each other. But instead it says between Korach and his congregation. It seems to be off in the Mishnah. We'll see that in a few minutes. Okay, the Torah tells us that Vayisu Refidim, that we left a place called Refidim, and we rested in the desert, and we Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Har, and the Jewish people rested under the mountain. The Or HaChaim, one of the commentaries on the Torah, says that each one of the stages of that sentence is problematic. When it says that the Jews left Rephidim and then they came to the desert. Well, we know the Torah is economy of words. All the Torah had to tell me is that they came to the desert. And if they came to the desert, I by definition know that they left the place they were in previously. So question number one is, why does it have to say that we left Rephidim? Question number two is when it says that we got to the Midbar, so then, and we rested in the Midbar, why was that important? The most important thing was that we came to Mount Sinai. So that step in between of that we came to the Midbar, we came to the desert, it doesn't really matter. Of course we're in the desert. That's where Sinai is. So again, if you're dealing with economy of words, why did it have to focus on the fact that we came to the desert? And then when it tells me that we rested under the mountain, the tense is wrong. It says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael. Vayichan Sham Yisrael. That's singular tense. It was a whole nation. It should have said Vayachanu. It should have said it in plural. That we rested there under the mountain. Vayachanu Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar. Why does it say it in singular as opposed to plural? So the Orach Chaim says that this in fact are the steps that are necessary in order to be able to receive the Torah. What happened in this place called Rephidim, which is the first part of this pasuk that says we traveled from Rephidim. So Rephidim is where Amalek attacked us. We've explained many times that what was Amalek, not who was Amalek, but what was Amalek. Amalek is called suffix. It's called doubt. Amalek is confusion. That they come into a situation and they shake up the dust so much that it becomes confusing to us, that we're not sure what the truth is, what's not the truth, because they look and they see only the surface of things. They see only the nature of things. They don't see behind the surface. They can't recognize something for what it really is. They can only recognize something for what they see. So when they look at a situation, all they see is the coincidence of that situation. They see the occurrence of that situation. They can't recognize that there's a godliness to it. For us, we pick up a fruit, and what do we say to a fruit? We say, "Blessed are you, God." Right, that gave us this fruit, that blesses us with the fruit. They don't see the blessing of God in a fruit. They see a fruit. A fruit is a beautiful thing, a natural thing. They look at a tree, they see nature. They can't see beyond that and recognize that there's something special there. In that place, they attacked us. What happened to us in that place? Why was it called Rephidim? Because the word Rephidim means Rafu Yadehem B'Torah. That our hands were rough, we were weak in Torah. Now, it happens to be this was before the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai. So what does that mean, Rafu Yadeim B'Torah? You can't be rough in something you don't have, right? We weren't given the Torah yet. We were given enough of the Torah, and enough direction, and enough preparation for the giving of the Torah that we had a commitment already to Torah. We didn't get the 10 Commandments yet. We didn't get God's revelation yet. But we already got some of the commandments. We got honoring parents. We got Shabbos. We got the red heifer. We got commandments in Egypt. We got commandments of Rosh Chodesh. We got commandments of Pesach. We got commandments of the Paschal Lamb, of eating matzah, not eating chametz. We already had a base of commandments. We had certain circumstances and events that took place and that happened to us to prepare us, to give us the right kind of character in order to be able to receive the Torah. And it was in that commitment that we became weak. And when we become weak, then it is totally possible for us to be confused and to be knocked off. You know, this past week's parsha, golden calf. Did you ever stop to wonder, how was that possible? How was that possible? They just saw the revelation of God. You know, did you ever see the revelation of God? If you've ever gotten a very large IRS return check, so then maybe that was, you know what a little revelation of God is. But it was do you ever see a revelation of God? You see the hand of God like clearly? They saw the closest you're ever going to see God. That's what they saw at Mount Sinai. And then 40 days later, 40 days later. So take a point in time. 40 days ago was the beginning of February. The beginning of February. Yeah, this is not such a fair exercise because I can't remember what I did, 12 hours ago. But just look back to the beginning of February, and imagine that's the time frame that we're talking about. That's the time, February 1st. That's the time frame we're talking about, and it's such an incredibly powerful experience. And then they built a golden calf. A golden calf. Do you know what that is? You know, that's like you're married to the most beautiful, wonderful, amazing superstar of a person, and you trade that person in for nothing. That's what we did to God. We traded him in for a golden behemoth. How'd that happen? It happened because we got confused. Because Moshe said he was coming down in 40 days. And we miscalculated those 40 days. Vayar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe, it says in the Torah that the nation saw that Moshe delayed. Commentaries say boshesh, that he came 6 hours later than what they calculated, because they calculated from moment to moment. In other words, if I tell you I'm coming back in 40, I'll be back exactly 40 days from now. There are two ways to calculate that. You can calculate that from whatever. All I got to do is look at my American clock. 7:52, right, your time, and you now calculate 40 days from 7:52. So that means I'm coming back 40 days from now, 7:52. Or I can say, wait a second, 40 days by me, it's 5:52 in the morning. So 40 days from now, well, it's not really from now because I got to play this day out, and we start counting from a full day from tonight, which means that I'm coming down. I'm going to be back later than what you think I'm going to be back, because you're counting 24-hour time periods and I'm counting full days. And that was the difference between Moshe and the people. But because we allowed ourselves to become confused, we were able to go from what's called Igra Rama Lebika Mikta, from the very top to the very bottom, in 1 second. People don't drop like that. People don't drop like that unless there's drugs involved. People don't just go from the highest place to the lowest place in 1 second. It's incremental. Today you get a little frustrated with one thing, tomorrow with something else, the next day with something else, and then 6 months from now you look backwards and you say, holy cow, look at how far I've dropped. I used to never allow myself to do this, and look what I'm doing now. That's the way the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, deals with us, and that's the way we drop. We don't drop like a ton of bricks. We drop slowly, incrementally. But at the golden calf, we dropped like a ton of bricks in 1 second. Because when don't you drop like a ton of bricks? That's when you have your mind still attached to you. But when you're confused, when you can't see right and wrong, when you can't see good and bad, when it's not clear to you, you can't see beyond the surface, then that's when we disintegrate. That's what happened to the Jewish people. That's how we could drop so fast, and how we could end up dancing around the golden calf and trade God in. In order to be able to receive Torah, we have to be able to stay clear and unconfused. Because when we allow ourselves to become confused, when we're not clear about ourselves, we're not clear about our capabilities, and we're not clear about our mandate, that's when we can destroy ourselves. That's what the first stage that the Torah is telling us in order to be able to receive the Torah. Vayisu me refidim. We have to leave this place called refidim. We have to leave our weakness. And if we leave our place of weakness, our place of confusion, so then we can receive the Torah. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is we have to come to the desert. That we came to the midbar, we came to the desert. Why was it important for us to come to a desert? Because step number 2 to receive the Torah is that we have to be mesim atzmai kimidbar. We have to make ourselves like a desert. That means as a desert is a very simple place. as beautiful as the desert might be, Enza Borrego, I mean, everybody knows how gorgeous that place is. Nevertheless, there is a simplicity to it. There is a simpleness. And if we're going to be able to receive the Torah, we have to make ourselves low like a desert. We have to make ourselves uncomplicated like a desert in order to be able to receive what God wants to give us. That's step number 2. Step number 3, without which there can be no reception of Torah. Step number 3 is Vayichan Sham Yisrael Keneged Har, that we have to rest under the mountain as one entity. That's why it speaks it in the singular, because we were there the moment before the Torah was given. Ke'ish echad b'leiv echad, one person, one voice, one entity, one organism. And if we don't have that quality, that ability, then it will be impossible for us to be able to receive the Torah. Wait a second. Is it really true that when we received the Torah, there was total equality? There isn't total equality in the Jewish people. You try to get the first aliyah in the Torah when there's a Kohen in shul. That ain't gonna happen, right? There's Kohanim, there's Leviim, and there's Yisraelim. We have a caste system in Judaism. We have rabbis, we have regular people, and the law of a Talmid Chacham and of the honor that we have to give to a Talmid Chacham, to a Torah scholar, is very different. We have to give honor to every human being, but we give them elevated honor. There's greater honor that we give them. There's a pecking order. There's a caste system. Even when God gave the Torah on the mountain, Moshe was up on top, Aaron was in the middle, the rest of the people were down on the bottom. We know that we had a tribal existence. When we say tribes, we think of, guys running around in loincloths with bones hanging out of their nose, right? And hubba, 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 right? When we think of tribes, we think of something from another land. We live in a tribal system. We just happen to not know which our tribes are right now, but we live in a tribal system. If you want to be the king, you have to be from the tribe of Judah. You want to be a Kohen or a Levi, you got to be from the tribe of Levi. Where you camped in the land of Israel, when we all go back to the land of Israel, then our tribes will be identified. And where you live in Israel, you could want to live in Jerusalem all you want. But if you ain't from the right tribe, you ain't getting an apartment there. And if you're from the tribe of Issachar, you can be one place, tribe of Benjamin, so then you have a shot at living in Modi'in, right? But you gotta know your tribe is going to be identified, and that's going to put you in a certain place. And your tribe, you have different customs. The tribe of Dan and the tribe of Benjamin, right? They're very different the way they did things. There was the place of unity was the temple. When we came into the temple, it was called an Ir Shechubah Yachtov. It was a city that drew us all together. But when we weren't in the temple, we all did it our own way. We all had our own customs, our own minhagim, our own life. We know even that we had flags, not just that we had tribes, but we had flags that identified those tribes. When we were traveling in the desert, we had every single family had a flag. Every single tribe had a tribal flag. The Medrash tells us that the nations of the world, when they saw us in the desert, they were hisavu, they desired our flags. Do me a favor, get your own shmatas and make a flag. Like, what do you mean you desired my flag? But we were so good at the Betsy Ross thing, like so good at the sewing that our flags were, wow, them Jewish flags, those are amazing. Like, what do they want our flags for? You could have a flag is not rocket science. You go get a shmata, you draw a nice little picture, and you put it on a stick, and shine, you got a flag. So what did they desire? It wasn't that they looked at us and they said, nice flags, Jews, but they wanted our flags. They wanted our flags, the Medrash says. So Moshe says to them, you can't have them, not for sale. What did they want? Normally, when you put up a flag, you put up an identity mark and you're differentiating yourself from everybody else. My flag is better than your flag. This is what we represent, and what we represent is better. We're splitting each other, and we're splitting away from each other by flags. And the crazy thing is that the flags of the Jewish people drew them together and made them closer. Now, how is that possible? A flag is something, there is no greater thing than saying, stay under your flag, like stay loyal to your flag, because you and I are separated from each other. So how did they unify us? Because there was another flag. And that was the flag that sat in the middle of the Jewish people. The way we were camped in the desert was we took 3 tribes on the north, 3 on the south, 3 in the east, 3 in the west. And in the center were the Levites, and then they, in the center of them, was the tabernacle, was the Mishkan. So all of our flags that differentiated us from each other, they were all centered around one main flag, which was the Torah. Because in the center of that tabernacle was the ark, and in the ark sat the 10 commandments, and sat the broken 10 commandments, the second set of 10 commandments, which means that they recognize that when you have the same common thing that you are centered around, that's the unifier. Our secret was that the Mishkan in the center, that was the thing that drew us all together. We were all committed to the same thing. Divisions aren't dangerous if they center around the same point. You're allowed to have your perspective, as long as it's a perspective of the center. We know, I speak out many times, that there's a Gemara that says that in the future, God is going to make a circle dance for the righteous. I always joke around. Imagine, this is what you've been gunning for your whole life, so that you spend eternity dancing around God, in a circle dance. It's like, a hoedown, the ultimate hoedown. Like, what's the image that's being presented? Because when you dance, everybody's holding hands, and in the center sits God. And when you dance, by definition, what happens is you are uprooted from your place, and you now stand in the place of the person that was in front of you. So now you're seeing the world from their perspective. And then when you move again, you now move to a third place, and you're seeing the same thing from a different perspective. And you're realizing that no matter what perspective, no matter where you're standing, you're looking and centered around God. And the image of this circle dance for the righteous that's going to be in the future is a realization that as long as you're looking at God, you can see him from many, many different angles. And that's called Oseh Shalom Bimromav, that God makes peace up on high. Hu Yaseh Shalom, he should make peace down here on earth. What does that mean? That means that we, just like on high, we have the ability to, if we stay connected to the center, there is peace. There are many different angels up there. There are many different perspectives up there. But as long as it's all perspectives of the same center, that's called shalom. We do not have to be exactly the same, but we have to be dedicated to the same thing. People are often very disturbed, especially here in Israel. You see it even more dramatically. I mean, our shul, if you look at it from above, is one big building, but the building is split into 2. And one side is an Ashkenazic shul, and one side is a Sephardic shul. And there are people, even in America, people get very, very disturbed by the fact that, the Sephardim eat rice, we don't eat rice, and, we can't get together on Pesach, and there's so many splits and fissures. Those are not splits and fissures. Those are not Machlokes, and those are nothing, because it's just different perspectives of the same thing. You walk into the Sephardic synagogue, they're going to be davening. They'll do it in a different order and a different sound. You're looking around for the camels when they're doing it, right? It's just got a totally different sound, but it's the same service. And they're praying to exactly the same God. And when I tell over the story of the golden calf, and when they tell over the story of the golden calf, it is the same, different accent, same calf. but it's this exactly the same perspective. And when I say same perspective, literally the same perspective. The messages and lessons that I learned from it are exactly the same messages and lessons that they learned from it. And therefore, that's called shalom. That's called peace. When we talk about a machlokes l'shem shamayim, it's not division that's the problem. There are divisions that are important. There are divisions that are acceptable. When we're trying to flesh out the truth of what's really right, and where there's a division that arises from that, that's okay, because it's all about the perspective and the connection to truth, and we see it from different places. And as long as it's about what we feel the truth is and how we're seeing that, but we're looking at exactly the same thing, that's ultimately called shalom. So we call it a machlokes because we're being cholek, we're splitting, but we're doing it for the sake of heaven. We're doing it around heaven. We're doing it around God and His Torah, and therefore that's called a machlokes l'shem shamayim. Hillel and Shammai believed in each other. They believed that there was truth and value in the opinion of each other. But at the end of the day, you got to choose one. Practical law, you got to know what to do. There's got to be one pathway. You can't have double pathways in Judaism, because then it's going to turn into two religions. It's got to be one pathway. You can have different customs, you can have different practices, but there's got to be one pathway. And therefore, Hillel had this characteristic stronger than Shammai. What do I mean? Whenever Hillel would talk about his opinion on a particular halachic matter, he would first mention the opinion of Shammai. And then he would say, but we see it this way. He gave total respect. They had a great dispute about whether you can consider certain people Jewish or not. And even though fundamentally Hillel and Shammai disagreed about something, Hillel allowed his children to marry from Shammai. And Shammai, vice versa, allowed his children to marry from Hillel. It wasn't about you. It wasn't about Shammai or Hillel. You're a bad guy. You're a stupid guy. You're an ignoramus, or you're somebody who is breaking from mainstream Judaism. They didn't see that. What they saw each other was they were standing on either sides of God. They were standing with their flags, but in the center was the flag of Torah. And when that is your commitment, then that's not called a machlokes. There was, when I was in yeshiva, so we go back to 1977 or 78. There was a rabbi. I'm not going to identify anything, but there was a rabbi. There was a rabbi in Israel who came out incredibly strong against a certain rabbi in America. And he did so because he felt that there were practices that were going on with the rabbi and his followers that smelled of idolatry. It wasn't just, he didn't agree with his halachic ruling, that it smelled of idolatry. And he printed a letter and sent it around in public and told people they have to stay away from that rabbi and his followers, because that is apostasy. Not the rabbi is an apostate, but that the way that they are practicing Judaism smells of apostasy. The other rabbi reacted by vilifying the first rabbi. Not by disagreeing with his position, but by vilifying him as a person. The next day, all around the world, in every Beis HaMedrash, in every study hall, every yeshiva, every shul, there were from South Africa to Israel to Australia to America, there were thousands of people. And this goes back, it's 35 years. This goes back 40 years. There were thousands of people that gathered for the way it was represented, for kavod haTorah, for the honor of Torah, and that moment was considered a black moment for the Jewish people, because that was a machlokes that was not l'shem shamayim. Because a machlokes for the sake of heaven is that I can vehemently dispute your position, but not you as a person. That's what Hillel and Shammai were all about. It was a vehement disagreement between them, but it wasn't personal. A machlokes that is not l'shem shamayim, that's Korach v'Hadassah. Their point was not to try to find the truth. Their point was to vilify Moses, was to knock down the Torah. They questioned Moses' authority, Moses' ability to be able to interpret the Torah, Moses' ability to be able to be the leader of the Jewish people. Korach was a disgruntled person because he was overlooked for a position of power. And he was so upset at that. He was so angry that Moshe, he was family to Moshe. He was cousins. And he was overlooked. He then waged this battle. This battle was about Korach. It wasn't about Torah. It wasn't about truth. It was about a personal vendetta. We know that because, well, I don't have time to go into how we know that, but it's very clear from the Torah and from our rabbis that Korach's entire battle was a personal battle. But you know what the litmus test is that it was a personal battle? You know what happened to those 250 followers? They started infighting with each other. They were following Korach, but each one was following for a different reason. And therefore, there was no unity. The only thing that unified them was their hatred of Moses and Aaron. But there was no unity between them. And when there was no unity between them, that's the litmus test that this is not for the sake of heaven. This is not l'shem shamayim. Because it was ultimately all about machlokes. I saw this once with my own eyes. I can't go into details, but I can tell you that I saw a machlokes that was being touted as a machlokes l'shem shamayim. It was not, and the proof was that when this one side lost, they disintegrated. They took a shul down with them. They took families down with them. There were divorces that took place. There were friends. There were larger extended families that dissolved. There were friendships, 30-year friendships that dissolved because of this. Because it wasn't l'shem shamayim for the sake of heaven. It was really ultimately all about themselves. And what the Mishnah is telling us is that if the machlokes is for the sake of heaven, it's to just clarify what the truth is. That's going to endure because that is who we are as a people. We're always looking and we're trying to decide, and we're investigating what's the truth, what's the right thing to do. And we're always seeing things from different perspectives. That's why Judaism is so rich, because we have all these different perspectives that are all committed to the same truth. But in machlokes, that's not l'shem shamayim, the people won't endure. It will destroy the people themselves, because if it's not for the sake of heaven, if it's a personal vendetta and a personal thing, then all it's going to do is to crush people, and it's going to dissolve people. It's not going to bring us forward. The Mishnah is critical in understanding that there is nothing wrong with having a different opinion, as long as that different opinion is a perspective on the Mishkan, on the tabernacle, on the flag in the center. As long as we are committed to that same flag, to the same truth, there's nothing wrong with disagreeing. Last week we talked about Ava. We talked about love. Part of love is the ability to be able to recognize and accept somebody else's perspective. And once we can do that, so then who's going to endure? Not the machlokes, the people. The nation is going to endure. If we continue to search and to hunt for truth, even though it's going to separate us, that separation is not that separation is not a devastating separation. That separation is only because we're looking and we're standing on two sides of the truth. But if that separation is bein mayim lemayim, between water and water, that's dangerous, because that's two things that should never have been separated. And if that's the case, so then that is going to bring us down. Okay. That's this week's Mishnah.
Rabbi.
Next week, we get the next really till the end of the chapter. Each one of them is, I mean, every Mishnah Pirkei Avos is a gem, but we get some really beautiful gems. We get to speak about next week a concept called mizake es harabim, doing things for the sake of the good of the nation, and living for the good of the nation, and how a person does that, and what goes on when a person is mizake es harabim, and when a person does something that can have a negative effect on other people and drag them down. Okay. Anyway, we'll see that next week in Yetz Hashem. Everybody should have a beautiful, amazing, wonderful week, and we'll see you soon. Yetz Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
for braving the traffic. And,
Yeah, oh boy.
and the traffic, the elements. That's my excuse these days. Whenever I come late to something, people will say, "Rabbi, what happened?" Traffic. from my bedroom to the screen. Okay, it's actually technology.
Thank you. Have a great week.
Figuring out what the right buttons to
Thank
push.
you. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye bye. Okay. We are holding on. Oh, let me see if I can do this.